going on, guys? Welcome back to Before the Whistle. I'm your host, Maddy, and before I head up to Thibodaux to get to the Manning Passing Academy, I had to get my Friday episode in and have a guest on that I've kind of wanted to bring on for a few weeks now, since I actually was guest on his morning show. Jacob Hester, he's one of the hosts of Off the Bench with T-Bob A. Bear on ESPN Baton Rouge from 7 to 9 every day. Does a bunch of stuff for Sirius XM. He's a former player for LSU. He was drafted by the Chargers and then played for the Broncos for a while. And I was very surprised that he also had no background in broadcasting. Just the more people that I bring on, each time I'm expecting them to have a more traditional path to this industry than I did. And maybe that's the unintended point of my show, I guess, is really all of these unconventional backgrounds making their way to this industry. And if that reaches someone out there that thinks they might have an interest in sports in some way, shape, or form, but isn't sure, or is just kind of nervous about doing it, this is your sign to just jump for it. Because again, if you caught my conversation with Mike Detillier last week, he was an aquatic engineer before he became a broadcaster and a draft analyst. Ross Jackson has a background in theater. And Jacob Hester, yes, he was a former athlete, but he originally went to school to become a physical therapist and then kind of just happened on broadcasting. But really the reason I wanted to bring him on was when I was on a show, and I was right when I had launched Before the Whistle, and they had asked me kind of what the point of the show was. And I brought up my vantage point of sideline reporting as kind of a unique one. And Jacob chimed in that he was also a sideline reporter at some point, spent time doing that and up in the booth, and that he kind of preferred the sideline. And it was really for that relationship component. And so, especially as someone that was a former athlete, that's something I really wanted to explore, especially on the heels of my conversation on Tuesday with myself, where I discussed injuries and, without making diagnoses, just kind of bringing in my background as an injury-riddled sports player, not a professional one in any facet, to kind of explain a lot of things and just provide context. And I think athletes really, especially former football players, just have that keen ability to do that in a way that I really had to go to the scouting academy and learn about. But just, learning how to look at things like body language, how to prepare for any type of broadcast, and approaching that kind of with the perspective of an athlete. And I really appreciate even more his time, considering that he mentioned his wife might be going into labor during our podcast with their 5th child. So this is a preemptive congratulations to the Hester family on that. And with that, I will get to our interview. You are a former athlete that kind of went into broadcasting. Was that what you had kind of intended to do after football? Or how did you kind of make your way to the radio booth?
Yeah, so not at all, actually. So I went to school, and when I graduated from LSU, it was kinesiology. I wanted to go to PT school, and that was my goal. I want to be a physical therapist, and I thought that was the plan. I had no idea that I would ever get into this crazy sports media world at all. Like, I was the shyest kid in the world. I'm talking about, wouldn't go into a gas station and hey, $5 on pump number 5. And yeah, $5 was actually a lot of gas, by the way, when I was a young child going to get gas for my parents. And so I was like, I wouldn't even do that. I'm like, man, there's no way I can't talk to any adult or a stranger there. I mean, the shyest kid, Maddy, that you could ever imagine. So I'm like, there's no way that I would ever do that. But you go to LSU, you get some media training there, and still, I didn't have an itch to really get into this profession. But it was when I was with the Chargers, it might have been second, third year in the league, the flagship station for the Chargers. Well, it was summertime, and they had somebody get sick, and it was somebody who was going to have to be like a solo host. And you're like, hey, anybody in here, they're in the locker room, anybody want to jump on the show and talk sports? And for me, I'm like, what are we going to talk about? And yeah, soccer. I think it might have been a World Cup year, and I love soccer, passionate about that. Baseball, the Padres, whatever it was. I'm like, I'll do it. Sure, why not? I did it, and that day, I'm like, this is what I want to do. I want to do this. And so I'm like, if y'all ever need anybody, I'll fill in. So throughout that spring and summer, I did, I think, once a week for 2 hours or something. I would just come in and we talk about whatever. And then from that moment, even though I still had 3 or 4 years left playing, I was like, if y'all need an interview, if you need somebody to talk, I'll do it. I really just fell in love with it that day. And so it was something that it hit me. I did it one time, and I had done interviews, but nothing like that before. And so I kind of had that aha moment.
That's fascinating. I'm kind of on the shyer side, but I did child theater growing up. So I think that kind of helped me a lot
Yeah.
with that kind of stage fright. But did you almost have a moment when, was it a live radio show where you're kind of like, oh, wow, this is really happening? Or did the switch just flip and it was innate?
Hey, it was a live radio show and the host was great. And they set me up for success. Like I didn't have to host it or anything. I was just reacting to it. And I'm like, you know what? This isn't too bad. Like nobody's like watching me. Now they can hear me. Now everything we do, you can watch. But, back then it was only audio. And I'm like, it's fine. Like we'll figure this out. And then I don't know what happened because even like giving speeches, I remember I went to Louisiana College after we won in '07 and I gave like their team speech kind of like they had their football banquet. And it was me. I was a lead up to Bobby Bowden. Like he was like the headline speaker. I'm like, oh, you are going to be disappointed. Like I'm supposed to go out here. Bobby Bowden can catch a crowd like from the first word that he says. And I've never done anything like this before, but I did that speech and I was like, you know what? That wasn't so bad. Like I didn't even really notice the people in the crowd. And so I think it was just a situation I had never done it before. And I thought I would be bad at it. I thought it would terrify me, but I do it. And it's like, okay, I'm talking football. I'm talking things that I know and I enjoy. And so ever since then, it's never really been an issue. And now like complete 180, I enjoy it. I love going out there. I love, talking to a crowd. It's not a situation where I even, think about getting nervous before. And my parents are still shocked by the fact that I get behind a microphone and talk to people for a living.
That's really fascinating. I assumed because again, you and T-Bob have such a rapport. It seems so natural for you guys that I don't expect everyone to have that background because I don't either, but to hear how shy you were. And, you're obviously a former athlete turned into broadcast. And there are a lot of guys out there that did play football. How has that kind of helped you in your broadcast experience? Obviously there's the X's and O's standpoint,
Yeah.
but kind of from that, like relating to what's going on the field.
So I think for me, the thing that I kind of take from my playing days, and it's not just football that I cover, and I love covering other sports. Now, football, like the X's and O's and understanding it, and this, like that can take you a long way, and you kind of understand the game. And so I think that's a big part. I think understanding the game is a big part of the job, and you have to do it at some level. And I think the best actually have that knowledge. But even sports, I'm not as comfortable because maybe I hadn't played those sports since high school. I think preparing like I did in the NFL because it's no secret. I was not the most athletic guy. I wasn't in the NFL because I was a physical freak. A lot of it had to do with being prepared, knowing my assignment and using that to my advantage. And I try to take that same work ethic and same, determination in putting my game plan together against my opponent as I do when I'm covering a sport, certainly one that I didn't play. So if I'm doing baseball or basketball, we do like on my Sirius XM show, we cover college hockey. I'll be honest, like there's not a lot of college hockey that I watch, but I have to be ready for it. So I try to take the same steps, the same notes. Maddie, if you're sitting here in my office, you can see, I got like the old school notepad right here and I still handwrite everything because that's the way that I learn. And I try to learn as much as I possibly can. And, that's kind of the way I try to attack every single sport that we're talking about. So I try to take those same things that I learned. And in college, I had fantastic coaches, and Jimbo Fisher was my offensive coordinator, and he really instilled how to take notes, how to learn it. It's not memorization, it's actually learning it and understanding it and not just memorizing what you have to do, but what everybody on the offense is doing. And then I get to the NFL, and I've got Phillip Rivers, absolute grinder in the way that he works. And then I have Peyton Manning. When I'm in Denver, it goes to another level. I'm like, I've never seen him have a missed assignment. Like he is just a machine. Like he knows this offense backwards and forwards. And so like learning even late in my career, that was year like 5 and 6 in my NFL career. You think you know everything. And then you see the way that Peyton Manning does it. You're like, oh, I can go a step. So like all of those resources that I had, I tried to learn how to put a game plan together. And I still try to do that no matter what the sport is.
Yeah, you just mentioned a ton of sports there. I'm curious as a side note, why soccer? Because that's kind of my big thing. I grew up playing soccer, but
yeah,
how did that kind of happen for you?
Same thing. I grew up playing soccer, love soccer. My family is actually like a soccer family. My older brother is a head coach of boys and girls varsity at Calvary Baptist in Shreveport. And so like he's always had a love for it. He passed that down to me. My younger brother played. My younger brother and sister actually played on like some FC Dallas teams, like their U15, U14 teams, and they continue to play. My little sister just graduated high school, and so she's played all throughout. And so my boys play, like my boys love soccer as well. So we've always been a soccer family. And I think like initially it was because like I thought it helped me transition, the footwork stuff that you learn to the football field. And funny story, like at the NFL Combine, I'm coming off the field and a Jacksonville scout stops me. He's like, "How long did you play soccer?" I'm like, "What do you mean? I hadn't talked about that." He goes, "Well, I can tell by the bag work out there on the field that you have like a history in soccer." I'm like, "You can tell like by the bag drills that I played soccer." He goes, "Yeah, I could tell. How long did you play?" And we have this whole conversation. So I tell that story to my boys all the time. Like, you are going to play soccer. Thankfully, they love it. But I'm like, it's great for conditioning. It's great for, footwork. And also like the chemistry of soccer. Like, this, you got to be on the same page. You got to all work together, offense and defense. And so it's always been a passion.
Yeah, and there's a lot of downtime in soccer that you have to kind of remain in the game. There's no start and stop kind of thing. No, I'm very impressed by that person that was able to tell that. But it's something I notice even when I almost like trip and fall, to be honest, is just like my ability to kind of pick myself up through my footwork. But the other thing you'd said is you originally wanted to go into physical therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear that a lot of the time from athletes. I actually did just my episode on Tuesday about injuries in general and how having that background kind of helps me empathize with what's going on with athletes a lot of the time. What was kind of your motivation for wanting to go initially into that side of things?
I just want to understand like how the body works initially. Like everybody's built different, and now you hear about it. Like back then, you didn't. Like, this guy's got a great gait, or this person has a bad gait, or whatever. Like, you hear about those things now, but like back then, you didn't really hear about that. But I was interested in that. I'm like, well, wait a minute, why does he walk like he walks, and she walks like she walks, and all of that? So it interests me, like the movement of the body and how you come back from injuries, and just all of that just fascinated me, because I always felt like too, like there was things that if you really knew your body, if you studied the body, that you could improve on to help you get to, because again, like I kind of joking, but I knew I wasn't going to be the most athletic person. I knew I had a skill set, but I wanted to get the most out of my skill set. So honestly, like that was my passion into getting into kinesiology, and then just understanding how the body worked.
And do you feel like you kind of draw upon that when you're maybe just injuries, but like you said, just kind of assessing how athletes are moving and having the awareness of things like, oh, maybe they have weak hips, so that's affecting how they're able to kind of cut and turn. Like, is that something that you still are able to think about when you're on the broadcast?
Oh, I think so, for sure. I think if you're breaking down like someone in the draft, it's like you see him, and you're like, oh man, I just don't know how long that person can play. I'm not sure, because you kind of see things in the way that his body moves. Even when you're trying to watch college baseball, has been on the forefront here in Louisiana, and you're watching college baseball, and you're watching a guy like Paul Skeens from LSU, and you're like, man, that just, it looks easy. It's not herky jerky. It's not full effort, because we have seen pitchers that it is full effort. Now they can throw 98, 99, but you see all the movement that they use to get that 98, 99 out of their body, and you're like, really good player. I don't know how long he can do it. I'm not sure that his body can keep up with what he has to do to get it there. And then you watch Paul Skeens, like, okay, that guy's going to play a while, because it just looks easy. It's fluid. It makes sense to you. So like all of those things I try to watch and break down and try to assess the situation, not just in football, but really in all athletics.
I think it's helpful just for, like you said, context in general, as even if it's not an immediate thing going on in the game, I think it's so important to discuss those things. You said if you're looking in the draft at a quarterback that puts way too much into his throwing motion, that's, you said, kind of a red flag. I think there's also, again, just that general understanding of, at least for me, I've gone through a lot of injuries, so I can kind of see how a recovery process takes longer. And sometimes it's like dehumanization of athletes, I feel like. And really the reason I wanted to bring you on is I didn't know that you had spent time on the sideline. And when I had come on with you and T-Bob, you had mentioned that you kind of agree with my idea that the relationship aspect side of it is kind of devalued. And speaking of that kind of idea of humanizing athletes again, how was that like for you on the sideline, and what did you kind of instill while doing that?
Yeah, so I love being on the sideline. Like if I have the choice, and I've done both, and this is not a slight at being in the booth. Like being in the booth, that is a real skill set. Certainly, if you're the play-by-play, that is a skill set that I don't think I will ever have in my life. I can practice it 1,000 times. It will never come to me. And then also like the analyst, like I respect that. But like I've done it both ways. And my first radio call, I mean, it was in the MEC, it was in the Rose Bowl, LSU UCLA, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. But there was a part of me that I felt like I was watching the game on TV. Like I didn't feel like I was really involved because I had always been close to the action. And maybe if you did it 1,000 times, you get used to that. But being on the sidelines, and I've done both, you get a feel of the game. You understand the flow of the game. You can read body language as well. Like I can tell if things are going right, if things are going bad. You can ear hustle a lot of things, and you can kind of find out what's going on. But just and also there's just more of a human element to it, and kind of reading and having those relationships and being on the sideline, and just I like to take the game in that way because I feel like I just get much more of a feel of how things are going down there. I like standing in the end zone as well because that's the way that I would watch tape. So I want to watch it that way. I want to see how things are opening up, and it's just a completely different job. I mean, you know this. It's not even. I feel like it's not even related to each other. Being in the booth to being on the sideline. So like if I ever was to do it full time, I think I certainly would enjoy being on the sidelines a little bit more, just because it gives you a completely different feel of the game than I think being in the booth. And again, being in the booth is a talent. We have to have that. And they send it down to us. You don't get to talk as much. Like you're not talking all the time. But when you talk, I do feel like it's very impactful.
Yeah, no, I say that all the time. I have no idea how they kind of just keep the consistent talking up and are able to call things in real time without flipping out like I do. I was going to ask, though, I was curious about where you would stand to actually watch the game, because I will say that's kind of the only thing that it's helpful for things like seeing blocks up close and being able to see those intricacies. But I have kind of struggled with actually watching the game from kind of the weird sideline perspective. So you actually will go and stand in the end zone on each side during the game.
I will. I feel like that's the way that I see the game the best. And sometimes you're far away, and I get that. And you try, and you know this. Like sometimes when you're trying to get to that other end zone because maybe they made a big play and it's about to. Sometimes you don't get there. So sometimes it's like the ball's already snapped. Certainly in college football before you can get there. But that's the way that I enjoy watching the game because as a running back, maybe it has something to do with it. I can see where the creases are. I can see how the offensive line's blocking. You can still see the push that they're getting up front. I can kind of watch the coverage as well. A lot of times I get behind the defense if I can as well. I like to see what the coverage is going to look like. So for me, I guess it goes back to me watching tape. When I'm on the sideline and I'm on a side kind of view, I don't feel like I can see that as much.
Yeah, I feel you. I don't always have the ability, I think, to go to the end zone,
Yeah,
but I
right.
tend to kind of run very far away and get behind
The worst is when
defense.
the worst is when you kind of get stuck, and I'm sure this has happened. You get stuck and you're trying to like make it to the other side, and then there's a play happening, and then they come down to you to ask you maybe what happened, and you're trying your best to run, talk, and get into position at the same time, and then you're out of breath, and then it's just a hot mess.
Yeah, it's the out of breath thing that I always kind of forget about, where I'm like, maybe I should time this out a little better, but it is kind of just exhilarating to chase the ball up and down the field. And
Yes.
like it makes me kind of, I think what I've realized of why I kind of go insane during games is it does kind of tap into my competitive athlete side of feeling like I'm somewhat in the action. But I've just kind of, for me, it's really been just, for lack of a better term, the noises that you hear during a game, like how hard hits are and how tangled up people get. At least for me, as someone that never played, that's something that I really took away from the sideline, was just how, lack of a better term, violent it gets really up close.
Oh, there's no question about it. I mean, that's what we love. Like we love the sounds of football. We love the smells of football. We love the smell of fresh cut grass and like all those things. Like you get that when you're on the sideline. And I just think like you can tell in football, like you can tell, okay, who's going to be the aggressor today? Or who's going to kind of counterpunch? Like who's going to kind of take it and try to play off of that? Or who's like, man, watch the Tulane Cotton Bowl. They were the aggressor, like in that game. Like you watch that tape, and USC struggled with how physical Tulane was, and like those are things that you probably noticed pretty early in that game, and that's why you're able to have a rusher run for over 200 yards, and you get a feel of that. I think 3 plays in, you can be like, okay, well, I know who's going to be that aggressor today. This team right now is going to try to counter off of it, and I'm not sure they can get it done. And you hear that, you feel that when you're down there on the sidelines.
Yeah, I always talk about momentum, and it's one of those things that you can't exactly quantify. But there was something in the air in Kansas State where that was the first time I really felt like
Mhm.
there was something going on down there. But yeah, so things like body language, I think that they kind of get devalued, and sideline reporting often gets kind of boxed into this. Oh, what are the injury updates and kind of prepackaged stories? But
Mhm.
as much as I think that I can offer insight on the field, to me, it's really, like you said, what's going on the player benches, how guys are communicating with each other, if their shoulders are slumped over, if someone's in
Yeah.
the corner, those things really all matter, at least to me.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this goes so far, and the body language is maybe to me the most important thing because not only in injuries, but you're right. Like if you have a situation where the play doesn't go your way, it's a 3rd and 11, you miss your block, and you had a guy open, but because you missed your block, the quarterback couldn't get it off. Well, how do you bounce back from that, right? If you have poor body language, and I preach this to my sons all the time, like you've got to have great body language because your teammates notice that they're going to feed off that. Well, you being down there, you're going to notice that. And you can't allow one loss to become 2 losses. And every single play is its on game. Right. And you got to go out there and you got to win those things. And so I enjoy the fact, like in good body language too. Like I was on the sidelines for 2019 LSU a lot, and that was some of the best body language that you'll find, right? And you knew that team was locked in, you knew they were ready to go, and they were so uplifting and encouraging to each other. Anytime somebody started to have that poor body language, you'd have someone come over and they'd fix it. And you don't get that from every single team. And I'm sure you saw a lot of that with Tulane last year. Like those are things that you notice when you're down there.
Yeah, I was just about to say, you have me kind of thinking back on why I was always so confident during these games and really that whole season. And it might have kind of been a subconscious thing where now I'm thinking back on kind of reporting on things like guys taking responsibility for plays that wasn't really their fault and getting
Yeah.
really, juiced up when they did end
Right.
up ultimately losing to UCF during the regular season, but they really stayed in that game the whole time. And it is that you're kind of almost putting words to, I guess, what I thought was just kind of this instinctual feeling. But that's something that, again, I really think is such an asset down there, and also just allows me to kind of
Yeah.
empathize with guys. And like you said, when they get injured, when there's a hard loss or something, I just feel like you feel it a lot more when
Mhm.
you're right down there in the action. It's almost like you win and lose with the team.
Yeah, certainly if you're with a team,
Yeah.
and I've done it both ways, but when you're with a team and it's your team and you go through the ups and downs and you've been there since training camp and you know the storylines, you know what they've gone through to get to that point, you do feel like at minimum you're an assistant coach. You know what I mean? Like you feel like you were so invested because you've been through all of those things. And so yeah, you kind of live through that. And the good and the bad. But when it's good, like it's really good, like you feel that emotion from everything that goes on. And I love what you said about, taking responsibility for things that weren't even their fault. Like that's the best to do it. That's what they do. Like, and like coming over, like, hey, I'll get you a better ball. You're like, I hit him right in the numbers. Like, what are you talking about? Well, no, that's what that good leader, that's what that person with that positive energy can kind of do for you.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like you said, especially when it's kind of unwarranted.
Yeah.
And so now I'm just, as kind of a takeaway, again, I'm very surprised that I keep having these guests on. I assume you guys all come from broadcast backgrounds, and we all just kind of fell into this industry, to be
Yeah.
honest with you, and kind of being a shyer person. What would you kind of offer as advice, I guess, to people? Because I have people reach out to me all the time asking to kind of how to break into this industry. And I'll be honest, I never had stage fright. I was never really a
Right.
shy kid. So I know you said it kind of was like a switch flipped for you, but in terms of your preparing, like you said, you approach it like a football game. What would you kind of say for people that want to get over that hump?
Yeah, I would say the preparation of it is key. Like if you do have that stage fright and you're a little reluctant to get up there, prepare, because if you're prepared, then you're going to feel so much better and more confident in what you're doing. And that worked for me. But you have to be prepared, you got to be ready to go and just have a plan, like but you got to go do it too. Like if you're scared to do it, you got to get over that somehow, and you got to go out there and you have to give it a try. You can't be scared of it, for forever. Like if it's something you really want to do, but you got to go out there, you got to give it a try. And like the more times you do it, the more times you're going to feel comfortable. And I am big about getting reps. Like, look, a lot of times, like you've come on my show before on Sirius and with T Bob, like those like relationships, like you come on with us, we come on with you, whatever it might be. Like if someone wants you to come on a show, I'm always like, hey, go do it. Go do it. I know sometimes it's not the easiest. I know sometimes you don't have time, but just get the reps. Even like I've been doing this for, gosh, 9 years now. No, go get reps. If someone wants you to come on the show, wants to talk about something, man, I am big about just get as many reps as you possibly can, because that's the only thing that's really going to continue to grow. You're going to get better. You're going to continue to work on your craft. So for me, it's all about prepping. It's about getting reps, and it's about taking that first big leap. Well, like whatever it might be. And sometimes you don't know when that leap is going to come. I'd been in the game for a long time, but the year that LSU won the national championship, they were about to have their championship parade. And I'd done things before to that point, but I never emceed a national championship parade. And I didn't know I was going to do it. Gordy Rush was actually going to do it. He's a sideline reporter for LSU, and he was going to do it. Something came up, and the night before the national championship parade, they're like, "Hey, you're up. Gordy can't do it." I'm like, "Oh, okay. Well, like, what's the format?" So you get the format, and you try to do as much prepping as you can. I mean, it's 13,000 people in the PMAC, but again, like, if able to get that preparation going, kind of learning the format, understanding what you're going to go up there and do. And so, like, that was the one time it's like, okay, like, things can change on you, but you don't have an excuse. Like, you had time, you had some time to get ready. So get ready for the situation, go up there and do your best. And so, like, it continues, moments like that continue to show up for you. And I would always encourage, man, take advantage of every opportunity you get. Don't say no because maybe you're nervous, or don't say no because you don't feel like you have the time. You have the time, you're good at your job, you know what you're supposed to go out there and do. So just go out there and have that opportunity and have fun.
Perfect. I mean, do you have anything else to add? I kind of feel like that's a great way to end this conversation.
Make fullbacks great again. We can do that. And fullbacks we trust. We can always end the conversation with that. Low man wins. Where's your neck roll? I always try to, any chance I get, I'm going to preach about fullbacks, Maddy. So, like, if I'm going to leave, the people with a word, it's got to be fullbacks.
I love that. That's perfect. I could not feel more similarly when the Saints threw to Adam Prentice. I'm like, yes, bring it back. And then Dennis Allen was talking about defending that kind of 2-back set. I want the Wildcat to just go full force in the NFL. So I'm with you on that one. All right, perfect. All right, y'all. I really enjoyed that interview, as I always tend to do on these shows, but I felt almost like I had a kindred spirit in Jake Hester. Just again, I really resonated with everything he was saying about his time on the sideline, and just the advantage that you have, that you really can't feel types of things up in the broadcast booth, but also bringing legitimacy to a lot of the things that I think I've said are really the most important part of my role, which is all about reading other human beings, reading things like their body language, seeing how they communicate with each other, sensing changes in momentum. Those are all things that I find very important, and they're very hard to quantify on a broadcast. And, without getting too into the weeds with this, I kind of ended talking with him about how sideline reporters a lot of the time can be seen as this fluff role. And sometimes that's a byproduct of, I think, the opportunities allowed to that broadcaster. And I'm very fortunate, again, to have a team in Corey Glore and Steve Barrios that treat me like a third arm of the broadcast, that come down to me almost every commercial break if I have something to say. So I've always kind of felt a little different in that aspect, but kind of trying to break through this perception of sideline reporters as just kind of a mouthpiece for injury updates and stories that they obtain before the broadcast. A lot of that is prep work, like he described. I don't take handwritten notes because I have screwed up my hands from falling on them, both in soccer and just in life, being a klutzy person. I have said that I am a very spastic, agile person. Talking about my footwork with Jake, I trip myself up a lot. Sometimes I'm able to catch myself, not so much all the time. So I stick to the computer, but just the preparing and getting those stories, I think, is really important. But then seeing them play out on the field and how things change on the sideline, because everything is in flux. That's something I really appreciated him bringing up. And like I said, I've had a lot of people reach out to me, ask for advice, ask for jobs. I just don't really know what's available. Like I said, I kind of stumbled into this job, as is apparently kind of the vibe for a lot of the people I brought on the show. But I had actually, my first real experience, it was going on radio with Gus Kattengale on the Sports Hangover, but I had kind of briefly done a Saints podcast with one of my coworkers and friends, Cade Kissner. He also went to Tulane, and Delvin Breaux, a former Saints player. it was a kind of short podcast. It didn't really last that long. And the production aspect was just too difficult for me. But Todd Graffinini, my mentor who helped me into my sideline reporting role, had really kind of pushed me to do that and said that I needed to get those reps and that experience. Just like Jake said, you don't know when that break is going to be. And being on this podcast now, but also just kind of understanding how to produce something, how to hold a conversation and be a host, even before we didn't bring guests or anything on that show, but just kind of conducting yourself amongst others. I really would encourage everyone to do that. Like you said, even if it's just a short radio bit, you don't know if you have time for. As someone, again, that has brought up my ADHD and my time management issues, I run into that problem a lot of the time, but it is something, again, that all of those small little podcast appearances, and I appreciated too what he said about building rapport with people that you're on with fairly often. That is worth it. It is kind of cultivating those relationships, but especially him bringing up how shy of a person he was, that really shocked me. Reminds me of my dad, who is a trial litigation attorney, and he has a fear of public speaking. And that's something I've always had trouble reconciling. And so, he seems so natural at it. Him and T-Bob to me are really just a standard to hold yourself to in broadcasting and radio, and especially just in their personality and humor and having a good time while doing so. So just, again, to hear that that's something that's not in his wheelhouse at all is really impressive. But also just, again, that former athlete perspective that I try to bring in as a soccer player. I also didn't know that he had such a background in playing soccer, but it goes to show you that it doesn't even matter if you played football. I think just playing a team sport, learning how to communicate, learning how to deal with highs and lows, really bad losses, that's something that even if you only played growing up, I think you can take away from. So I'll wrap this up. Like I said, I am off to Thibodaux to boil in the heat of Louisiana in June for the Manning Passing Academy. Again, as Mike Detillier had brought up when I had him on as my guest, something like 23 of the current 32 NFL quarterbacks all went to that camp. So it is something worth checking out if you're in the area. And again, as an advice to people out there, if there are things like this that are within driving range of you, I would seriously recommend going to them. I really had no reason to be there last year, but I just went to get a sense of what it was like. And it was actually the first time I'd ever asked a question at a press conference. And naturally it was to Eli Manning. And so that was really get your feet wet by jumping straight into the deep end. So all that to say, these conversations just really enrich my day. I love these guest episodes, and I really appreciate all the valuable insight that everyone has brought to the table so far. I am looking forward to continuing this, especially heading into training camp and everything, because this is really when Before the Whistle, I think, hits its stride. It is kind of in this month leading up to training camp and things really getting going. What is there still important to discuss? I will figure that out for you on Tuesday.